Today's episode is a little different, and I'm really excited about it. I have asked my really good friend. He's not like a best friend. He's an upper level, high level friend, and he's my arch nemesis, Rhett Shull. I've asked him to come on, take over the show, and talk about a topic that's really cool, something we've been talking about together. So after this little bit, it's going to be that intro bit, and I'm gone. You might not see me again. Don't get sad. I need you to trust me. This is a good episode. Let's roll with it. You're going to love it right now.
On today's episode of the JHS Show, we're going to talk about something a little bit different. That's right. They handed me the keys to the channel, said do whatever you want. And I figured with this great responsibility, I could cover anything. I could talk about any guitar, any player, any pedal, any amp, but I'm not going to do any of that. Instead, I'm going to talk about something that I know almost nothing about, something that I'm a complete beginner in, a total noob, and that is modular synthesis. Modular synthesis is something that is very niche, very complex, pretty hard to understand, but above all else, really, really cool. It's something that I'm getting into, I'm really enjoying learning about, and it's something that I think a lot of guitar players out there will be getting into in the very near future. It seems there's a natural progression between building your first pedal board and understanding pedals and effects and getting into something like this. So, I'm not Josh, and today we're not talking about guitar pedals, but I think you're gonna dig it either way. Let's get started. So what exactly is modular synthesis? To answer this question, I reached out to Lisa Belladonna. Lisa is a synthesist, guitarist, composer, sound designer, and she has one of the coolest modular setups that I've ever seen.
Well, it's usually based around control voltage synthesis, analog synthesis, and it is an opportunity to really extend and matrix your polarity of control with these instruments. And it's really just allows a really limitless possibility with everything that you have in that electronic system, so to speak.
So what we would now call modular synthesis started out in the 1960s with the birth of analog synths. Robert Moog and Don Buchla were two pioneers of electronic music and synthesis. They were both developing these instruments that would completely reshape the history of music. Honestly, the development of the synthesizer has had one of the biggest impacts on not just music, but culture in general ever in the history of the world. It's massive. Now, the early synths that Moog and Buchla were developing consisted of different modules, but they had two completely different approaches. Moog's early synths were based around keyboards. He wanted to develop an instrument that someone could play. And this was key to the success of Moog and why people like Stevie Wonder were so quick to adopt it. Whereas Buchla was coming from a different perspective. He wanted something that didn't feel like a traditional instrument or act like a traditional instrument, and he went more of what we would call the generative route. Now, the main idea behind the modular setup is you could patch together a unique signal path every single time you sat down with your instrument. This gave you the ability to create new sounds on the fly that you couldn't do with a self-contained unit. However, the modular thing didn't last for very long in those early days because it was insanely expensive. Most musicians couldn't afford a Moog or Buchla synth because they were just crazy money. But like most technologies, it wasn't long before things got shrunken down and made more affordable and more accessible for the masses. And that's exactly what happened with synthesis. So through the 70s and the 80s, modular synths essentially died off for their more affordable, sleeker, more capable counterparts. But in 1995, that all changed when a man named Dieter Doepfer created a new format, a new style of modular synth called Eurorack. It was the Doepfer A100. And this is stuck around. If you've ever heard the term Eurorack, that is the standard that modular synths exist based off of today. It was developed by Doepfer in '95 and it's stuck around ever since. And not long after the A100 system was introduced, other companies started developing modules to fit in this 3U standardized space. And it was this Eurorack format that helped bring back the modular setup. It was making a comeback. And in the last few years, we've seen an explosion in the popularity of modular synths like this. And that's how I found out about modular. It was surfing YouTube. I came across a video of somebody playing a synth not much different than this one with a huge mess of wires, creating these incredible sounds that I had never heard before, and I was immediately interested. Okay, so I've got a pretty simple patch set up here to kind of demonstrate how quickly modular synthesis can get away from typical guitar effects. Right now, I've got my modular rack set up essentially like a pedal board. My guitar is going into the rack here, and then I'm patched into this unit here, which is a Strymon Magneto. It's essentially a 4-head tape delay with spring reverb. It's really, really cool. And then out of the Magneto, I'm going here into the front of a guitar amp. So it's essentially like having a delay pedal on a pedal board. And I've got just a typical delay pulled up with a little bit of spring reverb. That's nice, but again, that's not anything that a normal delay can't do. But this is where we start to introduce control voltage, or CV. And this is the real secret behind the magic that is modular synthesis. So above it, we're using this module called Maths. Now this I bought a few months ago because just about everyone who knows anything about modular synthesis says you need to have this in your case, and they're right. Now, put simply, Maths is what's called a function generator, which is a fancy way of saying it does a whole bunch of different stuff. I've owned this thing for a few months and haven't even begun to scratch the surface of everything that it can do. But essentially, right now, what I'm using it for is what's called an LFO, or a low frequency oscillator. And I've patched this green patch cable from the clock output of the Magneto into the trigger input of Maths. What that means is the tap tempo that I put into the delay pedal here is now clocking or setting the time for this Maths, or my LFO. And you can see these two blinking lights down here, the green and the yellow light. Those are my LFOs. And I'm going to use that LFO to trigger different things and control different things on my delay that you can't do with a pedal. So a quick example is built in the Magneto is a spring reverb. Now let's say I wanted to modulate the amount of spring reverb that I was getting. Well, I can plug into this output here, into this spring reverb input, and now I have a spring sound that fades in and out with the LFO. You can think of it almost like an invisible robot hand sitting there twisting that knob back and forth for me. So that's pretty cool, but we can actually take this a few steps further. Instead of modulating the amount of spring reverb, I could modulate the speed of the delay. That's interesting, to say the least. I like the springs, so we're going to stay there for a second. But I can also do things like trigger the amount of delay repeats that I'm getting based on how hard I'm playing. So I'm going to take this right out. I'm going to go into the trigger input of channel 4 on the maths. And now I'm taking the trigger output from channel 4 on the maths, and I'm going into the repeats input. So now maths is going to modulate the amount of repeats based on how hard I'm playing my guitar. Take it a step further by modulating other things like the infinite control, for example. I can take this trigger output here and tell it to trigger the infinite hold, the infinite repeats on the delay in time. Because again, I'm clocking the maths, this left channel of the maths, from the Magneto itself. So every time you see this blue light flash here, it's essentially infinite repeats. And so what that does is it lets you kind of interplay off of the delay repeats themselves. Now that's all cool, but can you turn your delay pedal into a fuzzed out tremolo? With this, you can. So essentially what I've done is taken the main output of the Magneto and I've run it through this Quad VCA channel 1. Then I'm using a different clock source from the Magneto to clock what's called a VCA, which is a voltage controlled amplifier. And there's a saying in modular that you can never have enough VCAs. And I think that's true, and here's why. This is with no modulation, just the delay by itself. Now I'm going to bring up the VCA, which is going to control the output of my delay right here. So how have you seen like the modular world change over the last, let's say, 3 or 5 years? Has it really blown up in popularity that you've noticed?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, from when I got into it, especially, it was nobody was interested, other than like really serious movie score people or avant-garde musicians, things like that. But in the last 3 to 5 years, it's just the whole awareness of it and the sort of thirst for people that want to have knowledge with it. At least people that come my way, it's more than tenfold. It's a great sign that people are still, they have an open mind about music and about music technology. And then it just doesn't have to be the same thing. You can, expand and adapt many different possibilities with your sound and with where you want to take your music. So yeah, I've seen it. It's crazy how much it's all changed.
Now I love what Lisa was talking about there, because that's essentially what initially drew me to the idea of building my own modular synth. The fact that it's completely different than anything I've ever done as a musician before. It's a way to completely flip everything you know about music and how to make music on its head and come at it from a completely different perspective. I find that really refreshing. And as someone who's been playing guitar for almost 20 years at this point, it's actually really nice to be a beginner at something again in music. And this is all very finite. By doing this, I essentially undid all of the work from that patch that you just heard. And I'll probably never get that sound back ever again. No matter how hard I try, no matter if I take pictures of presets and try and save my settings, I'll probably never get back there again. What you just heard will only happen that one time. I think that's actually really cool.
Well, yeah, I mean, that's the whole idea as far as I'm concerned. When it comes down to everything has to have a preset or everything has to be like recalled for a show, it's like, it's boring. There's no risk involved. There's no heat involved. It's, I think that's part of what I love about modular synthesis is to be able to go into a performance space or for a record and just react, make a selection and react to the environment and create something that is symbiotic with the environment, which is something you can do on a modular synthesizer that you can't do with every other instrument. You can really go in and make a sound that moves the room.
Let's say you want to get into modular and start building your first case. There's a few things that I would recommend doing before you start to drop money on this, because this is really expensive. In fact, that's one of the biggest drawbacks to modular synthesis right now is it's really, really pricey. More expensive than building an equivalent sort of pedal board setup for us guitar players. Now, over the next few years, I think that price will continue to drop as more and more people get into modular synthesis, but at the time of making this video, it's still a pretty expensive way to make music. So before you start dropping money on modules, I would recommend a few online resources. First one is called VCV-Rack. This is a virtual plug-in modular synth system, and it is huge. Basically every module that you would ever come across in the real world, LFOs, VCAs, oscillators, everything that you would ever need or want in your case is in VCV-Rack, and it's totally free. You can just go online, download the program, and start experimenting, building cases and racks that do all kinds of things. You can even patch your guitar into the system and play through it like you would a hardware synth. VCV-Rack is awesome for learning the fundamentals of synthesis. If you're just starting out like I have been the past few months, it's really helpful to understand what a VCA is doing, what an oscillator is doing, what an LFO is doing, or a filter. Rather than spending hundreds or thousands of dollars putting a case together, you can just sit there and play with stuff online. It's a ton of fun. The next thing I would recommend is Modular Grid. Modular Grid is crucial for helping you plan out your build. You can pick a case of a certain size and start picking out modules that you think you might want to buy and placing them in the case. This helps you keep track of the space that you have available. It helps you keep track of power requirements, which are super important. And it'll also tell you how much money you're going to drop on your case if you're buying everything new. And the last thing I'll recommend is Andrew Huang's YouTube videos. These were huge for me when I was really getting interested in modular about a year ago. He has a few videos dedicated to the basic fundamentals of modular synthesis, teaching you about things like CV and LFOs. We'll have those linked in the description box down below. Andrew's channel is amazing, and he is a pro when it comes to modular synthesis, so I'd highly recommend checking those out. So let's say you've gone through all that stuff and you know you want to start getting into this. A few things you're going to need to get. First and foremost is a case, some form of rack that will hold not just your modules, but your power supply. The power supply is very, very important. Modules are powered off of these ribbon cables here, and you need some kind of bus board or flying ribbon cable setup to power all of your modules. I bought this case used on Reverb about 6 months ago and started slowly filling it up. Now, if you notice, my case is about half empty, and that's on purpose. I've been acquiring modules, some by purchase, some were given to me by Moog and Strymon, but I've been getting modules very slowly and being intentional about learning what they do, specifically things like the maths, which does a ton of stuff. This helps keep me from getting overwhelmed by slapping a bunch of stuff in this case and then not knowing what to do with any of it. I'm buying one module at a time and really being intentional about learning what it does and what it doesn't do so that my next purchase will be more informed. It's really helpful to have an idea of what you want your case to do. For me, I want this to be a composition tool. I want to be able to create sounds, melodies, chords, beats, and then be able to plug my guitar in and use it as an effects rack like I've been using in this video, or also play my guitar along with it.
Your viewers on your program would like to reach out to me on Instagram, Lisa Belladonna. They're welcome to do that. I will do my best to always answer every question that comes my way, and maybe I can help with piecing that together. But I would say, you know, you want to find something that has audio inputs for the guitar. And I'm a very stereo-minded musician, even as a guitarist. You know, for years, I always had 2 half stacks and a stereo situation going on. So even with synthesis or guitars included with that, you want to be able to have some stereo filtering. You want to be able to have some way to do filter sequences. You want to be able to have really amazing controllable phase shifting. And that can really open up a lot of passageways for any musician.
So that's everything that I know about modular synth. I'm in love with this stuff. And if you're interested in following along with my build and what I'm going to be doing with this thing, I'm going to be doing more videos on my channel about modular synthesis and trying to figure all this stuff out. So go follow me over there if you're interested. Huge, huge thank you to Lisa Belladonna for coming on and sharing some of her expertise. I'll be putting my whole interview with her up on my second channel, so if you're interested in seeing everything she had to say, you can check that out. It'll be linked down below as well. And massive thank you to Josh and the team at JHS for letting me drive the ship today. Hopefully I didn't scare off too many subscribers. But even if I did, I think it's still safe to say that my slide tone absolutely owns Josh's, so much so that I didn't even need to play it in this video, because you all know that my slide sounds are far superior. So now let's do record time. My selection for record time this week might be a little too obvious, but I think it works. Dark Side of the Moon. Again, you all know this record, you all love this record, but I picked this because this was the first time as a young guitar player, somebody who was first getting interested in music, that I remember hearing synthesizer and really paying attention to it as an instrument. Richard Wright's synth work on this record is absolutely phenomenal. And he was one of the pioneers of analog synthesis back in the 70s. And the work that he did with Pink Floyd using his synths is second to none, in my opinion. That, along with David Gilmour and his iconic tones and sounds and playing on this record, I think it fits. Again, it's the obvious choice, maybe a little too obvious, but I mean, come on, it's a classic. So with that, I'm gonna hand it back over to Josh to wrap up the video.
Thanks so much for watching this. I know that you enjoyed it. It's such a cool subject. I'm glad Rhett could take over, even though he's my arch nemesis. I'm starting to like him. He's pretty cool. I know he's a lot better to look at than me, you know. I came back on and you're like, oh God, there's Josh again. So anyway, I need to get out of here, but I do need to let you know that I need you to just hit like if you liked it. subscribe to the channel. Go subscribe to Rhett's channel. Click the bell icon to get notifications here and click it over on his channel. Then go like something on his channel. Go to thejhsshow.com to check out stuff we have. Go to rhettshull.com to check out stuff he has. Do a lot of stuff. I know I'm asking a lot of you, but you're strong enough. I believe in you. Have a wonderful day.